Volume 1, Introduction, Part 6 of Rob Roy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. Rob Roy, by Sir Walter Scott, Volume 1, Introduction, Part 6, Section 6, Number 2, Letters. From and to the Duke of Montrose, respecting Rob Roy's arrest of Mr. Graham of Killearn. The Duke of Montrose to... It does not appear to whom this letter was addressed. Certainly, from its style and tenor, it was designed for some person of high rank and office, perhaps the King's advocate for the time. Dated Glasgow, the 21st of November, 1716. My Lord, I was surprised last night with the account of a very remarkable instance of the insolence of that very notorious rogue, Rob Roy, whom your lordship has often heard named. The honour of his Majesty's government being concerned in it, I thought it my duty to acquaint your lordship of the particulars by an express. Mr. Graham of Killearn, whom I have had occasion to mention frequently to you, for the good service he did last winter during the rebellion, having the charge of my Highland estate, went to Monteith, which is a part of it, on Monday last, to bring in my rents, it being usual for him to be there for 2 or 3 nights together at this time of the year, in a country house, for the conveniency of meeting the tenants upon that account. The same night, about 9 of the clock, Rob Roy, with a party of those ruffians whom he still keeps about him, and has since the last rebellion, surrounded the house where Mr. Graham was, with some of my tenants doing his business, ordered his men to present their guns in at the windows of the room where he was sitting, while he himself, at the same time, with others, entered at the door with cocked pistols, and made Mr. Graham prisoner, carrying him away to the hills with the money he had got, his books and papers, and my tenants' bonds for their fines, amounting to above £1,000 sterling, whereof the one half had been paid last year, and the other was to have been paid now, and at the same time had the insolence to cause him to write a letter to me, the copy of which is enclosed, offering me terms of a treaty. That your lordship may have the better view of this matter, it will be necessary that I should inform you that this fellow has now, of a long time, put himself at the head of the clan MacGregor, a race of people who in all ages have distinguished themselves beyond others by robberies, depredations, and murders, and have been the constant harbourers and entertainers of vagabonds and loose people. From the time of the Revolution he has taken every opportunity to appear against the government, acting rather as a robber than doing any real service to those whom he pretended to appear for, and has really done more mischief to the country than all the other Highlanders have done. Some 3 or 4 years before the last rebellion broke out, being overburdened with debts, he quitted his ordinary residence, and removed some 12 or 16 miles farther into the Highlands, putting himself under the protection of the Earl of Breadalbine. When my Lord Cadogan was in the Highlands, he ordered his house at this place to be burnt, which your lordship sees he now places to my account. This obliges him to return to the same country he went from, being a most rugged, inaccessible place, where he took up his residence anew amongst his own friends and relations, but well judging that it was possible to surprise him, he, with about 45 of his followers, went to Inverary, made a sham surrender of their arms to Colonel Campbell of Finnab, commander of one of the independent companies, and returned home with his men, each of them having the colonel's protection. This happened in the beginning of summer last, yet not long after he appeared with his men twice in arms, in opposition to the king's troops, and one of those times attacked them, rescued a prisoner from them, and all this while sent abroad his party through the country, plundering the country people, and amongst the rest some of my tenants. Being informed of these disorders after I came to Scotland, I applied to Lieutenant General Carpenter, who ordered 3 parties from Glasgow, Stirling, and Finlarig, to march in the night by different routes, in order to surprise him and his men in their houses, which would have its effect certainly if the great rains that happened to fall that very night had not retarded the march of the troops, so as some of the parties came too late to the stations that they were ordered for. All that could be done upon the occasion was to burn a country house where Rob Roy then resided, after some of his clan had from the rocks fired upon the king's troops, by which a grenadier was killed. Mr. Graham of Killearn, being my deputy sheriff in that country, went along with the party that marched from Stirling, and doubtless will now meet with the worst treatment from that barbarous people on that account. Besides that he is my relation, and that they know how active he has been in the service of the government, all which your lordship may believe puts me under very great concern for the gentleman, while at the same time I can foresee no manner of way how to relieve him, other than to leave him to chance and his own management. I had my thoughts before of proposing to government the building of some barracks, as the only expedient for suppressing these rebels, and securing the peace of the country. In that view I spoke to General Carpenter, who has now a scheme of it in his hands, and I am persuaded that will be the true method of restraining them effectually. But in the meantime it will be necessary to lodge some of the troops in those places, upon which I intend to write to the General. I am sensible I have troubled your lordship with a very long letter, which I should be ashamed of, were I myself singly concerned, but where the honour of the King's government is touched I need make no apology, and I shall only beg leave to add that I am, with great respect and truth, my lord, your lord's most humble and obedient servant, Montrose. Copy of Graham of Killearn's letter enclosed in the preceding. Chavalarach, November 19th, 1716. May it please your Grace, I am obliged to give your Grace the trouble of this by Robert Roy's commands, being so unfortunate at present as to be his prisoner. I refer the way and manner I was apprehended to the bearer, and shall only in short acquaint your Grace with the demands, which are, that your Grace shall discharge him of all sums he owes your Grace, and give him the sum of 3400 marks for his loss and damages sustained by him both at Craigrostown and at his house Auchengassallen, and that your Grace shall give your word not to trouble or prosecute him afterwards, till which time he carries me all the money I received this day, my books and bonds for interest, not yet paid, along with him, with assurance of hard usage, if any party are sent after him. The sum I received this day, conformed to the nearest computation I can make before several of the gentlemen, is 3227 pounds 2 shillings 8 pence Scots, of which I gave them notes. I shall wait your Grace's return, and ever am your Grace's most obedient, faithful, humble servant, Sic subscripturor, John Graham. The Duke of Montrose to Unknown, dated 28th November 1716, Killearn's release. Glasgow, 28th November 1716. Sir, having acquainted you by my last of the 21st instant of what had happened to my friend Mr. Graham of Killearn, I am very glad now to tell you that last night I was very agreeably surprised with Mr. Graham's coming here himself, and giving me the first account I had had of him from the time of his being carried away. It seems Rob Roy, when he came to consider a little better of it, found that he could not mend his matters by retaining Killearn his prisoner, which could only expose him still the more to the justice of the government, and therefore thought fit to dismiss him on Sunday evening last, having kept him from the Monday night before under a very uneasy kind of restraint, being obliged to change continually from place to place. He gave him back the books, papers, and bonds, but kept the money. I am with great truth, sir, your most humble servant, Montrose. Some papers connected with Rob Roy MacGregor, signed Roe Campbell, in 1711, were lately presented to the Society of Antiquaries. One of these is a kind of contract between the Duke of Montrose and Rob Roy, by which the latter undertakes to deliver within a given time 60 good and sufficient Kintail Highland cows, betwixt the age of 5 and 9 years, at 14 pounds Scots per piece, with ane bull to the bargain, and that at the head dykes of Buchanan upon the 28th day of May next, dated December 1711. See Proceedings, Volume 7, page 253. Number 3, Challenge, by Rob Roy. Rob Roy to Ain High and Mighty Prince James, Duke of Montrose. In charity to your Grace's courage and conduct, please know the only way to retrieve both is to treat Rob Roy like himself, in appointing time, place, and choice of arms, that at once you may extirpate your inveterate enemy, or put a period to your puny life in failing gloriously by his hands. That impertinent critics or flatterers may not brand me for challenging a man that's repute of a poor dastardly soul. Let such know that I admit of the two great supporters of his character, and the captain of his bands, to join with him in the combat. Then sure your Grace won't have the impudence to clamour at court for multitudes to hunt me like a fox. under pretence that I am not to be found above ground. This saves your Grace and the troops any further trouble of searching. That is, if your ambition of glory press you to embrace the unequalled venture offered of Rob's head. But if your Grace's piety, prudence, and cowardice forbids hazarding this gentlemanly expedient, then let your desire of peace restore what you have robbed from me by the tyranny of your present situation. Otherwise your overthrow as a man is determined, and advertise your friends never more to look for the frequent civility paid them, of sending them home without their arms only. Even their former cravings won't purchase that favour. So your Grace by this has peace in your offer, if the sound of wax be frightful, and choose you will, your good friend or mortal enemy. This singular rhodomontade is enclosed in a letter to a friend of Rob Roy, probably a retainer of the Duke of Argyle in Isle, which is in these words: Sir, receive the enclosed paper. When you are taking your bottle, it'll divert yourself and comrades. I got no news since I seed you, only that we had before about the Spaniards is likely to continue. If I'll get any further account about them, I'll be sure to let you know of it. Until then, I will not write any more till I'll have more sure account. And I am, sir, your most affectionate cousin, and most humble servant, Rob Roy. April 16th, 1719. To Mr. Patrick Anderson at Hades. The seal, a stag, no bad emblem of a wild cateran. It appears from the envelope that Rob Roy still continued to act as intelligencer to the Duke of Argyle and his agents. The war he alludes to is probably some vague report of invasion from Spain. Such rumours were likely enough to be afloat in consequence of the disembarkation of the troops who were taken at Glen Shiel in the preceding year, 1718. Number 4. Letter from Robert Campbell, alias MacGregor, commonly called Rob Roy, to Field Marshal Wade, then receiving the submission of disaffected chieftains and clans. This curious epistle is copied from an authentic narrative of Marshal Wade's proceedings in the Highlands, communicated by the late eminent antiquary George Chalmers, Esquire, to Mr. Robert Jameson of the Register House, Edinburgh, and published in the appendix to an edition of Burt's Letters from the North of Scotland, 2 volumes, 8 folio, Edinburgh, 1818. Sir, the great humanity with which you have constantly acted in the discharge of the trust reposed in you, and your ever having made use of the great powers with which you were vested as the means of doing good and charitable offices to such as you found proper objects of compassion, will, I hope, excuse my importunity in endeavouring to approve myself not absolutely unworthy of that mercy and favour which your Excellency has so generously procured from his Majesty for others in my unfortunate circumstances. I am very sensible nothing can be alleged sufficient to excuse so great a crime, as I have been guilty of it, that of rebellion. But I humbly beg leave to lay before your Excellency some particulars in the circumstance of my guilt, which I hope will extenuate it in some measure. It's my misfortune at the time the rebellion broke out to be liable to legal diligence and caption, at the Duke of Montrose's instance, for debt alleged due him. To avoid being flung into prison, as I must certainly have been, had I followed my real inclinations in joining the King's troops at Stirling, I was forced to take party with the adherents of the Pretender. For the country being all in arms, it was neither safe nor indeed possible for me to stand neuter. I should not, however, plead my being forced into that unnatural rebellion against his Majesty King George, if I could not at the same time assure your Excellency that I not only avoided acting offensively against his Majesty's forces upon all occasions, but, on the contrary, sent his Grace the Duke of Argyle all the intelligence I could from time to time of the strength and situation of the rebels, which I hope his Grace will do me the justice to acknowledge. As to the debt to the Duke of Montrose, I have discharged it to the utmost farthing. I beg your Excellency would be persuaded that, had it been in my power, as it was in my inclination, I should always have acted for the service of his Majesty King George, and that one reason of my begging the favour of your intercession with his Majesty for the pardon of my life is the earnest desire I have to employ it in his service, whose goodness, justice, and humanity are so conspicuous to all mankind. I am, with all duty and respect, your Excellency's most humble and obedient servant, Robert Campbell. No. 4A. Letter. Escape of Rob Roy from the Duke of Atholl. The following copy of a letter which passed from one clergyman of the Church of Scotland to another was communicated to me by John Gregorson, Esquire, of Ardtornish. The escape of Rob Roy is mentioned, like other interesting news of the time, with which it is intermingled. The disagreement between the Dukes of Atholl and Argyle seems to have animated the former against Rob Roy as one of Argyle's partisans. Reverend and dear brother, yours of the 28th of June I had by the bearer. I am pleased you have got back again your delinquent, which may probably save you of the trouble of her child. I am sorry I have yet very little of certain news to give you from the court, though I have seen all the week's prints, only I find in them a passage which is all the account I can give you of the indemnity. Yet, when the estates of four-faulted rebels comes to be sold, all just debts documented are to be preferred to officers of the Court of Inquiry. The bill in favours of that court against the Lords of Session in Scotland and passed the House of Commons, and come before the Lords, which is thought to be considerably more ample, informally with respect to the disposing of estates, canvassing, and paying of debts. It's said yet the examinations of Cadogan's accounts is dropped, but it wants confirmations here as yet. Oxford's trial should be entered upon Saturday last. We hear that the Duchess of Argyle is with child. I do not hear yet the divisions at court are anything abated, or of any appearance of the Duke's having anything of his major favour. I heartily wish the present humours at court may not prove an encouragement to watchful and restless enemies. My accounts of Rob Roy, his escape, yet after several embassies between his Grace, who I hear did correspond with some at court about it, and Rob, he at length, upon promise of protection, came to wait upon the Duke, and, being presently secured, his Grace sent post to Edinburgh to acquaint the court of his being apprehended, and call his friends at Edinburgh, and to desire a party from General Carpenter to receive and bring him to Edinburgh, which party came the length of Kenross in Fife. He was to be delivered to them by a party his Grace had demanded from the Governor at Perth, who then, upon their march towards Dunkeld to receive him, were met by and returned by his Grace, having resolved to deliver him by a party of his own men, and left Rob at Loggerate under a strong guard, till yet party could be ready to receive him. This space of time Rob had employed in taking the other dram heartily with the guard, and when all were pretty hearty, Rob is delivering a letter for his wife to a servant, to whom he most needs deliver some private instructions at the door for his wife, where he is attended with on the guard. When serious in this private conversations, he is making some few steps carelessly from the door about the house, till he comes close by this horse, which he soon mounted and made off. This is no small mortification to the guard, because of the delay it gives to their hopes of a considerable additional charge against John Roy, i.e. John the Red, John Duke of Argyle, so called for his complexion, more commonly styled Red John the Warrior. My wife was upon Thursday last delivered of a son after sore travail, of which she still continues very poorly. I give your lady hearty thanks for the Highland plaid. It's a good cloth, but it does not answer the set I sent some time ago with MacArthur, and though it had I told in my last, yet my wife was obliged to provide herself to finish her bed before she was lighted. But I know your letter came not timely to your hand. I am sorry I had not money to send by the bearer, having no thought of it, and being exposed to some little expenses last week, but I expect some sure occasion when order by a letter to receive it. Excuse this freedom. From etc., etc., etc. Manse of Comrie, July 2nd, 1717. I salute your lady. I wish my her daughter much joy. Number 5. Highland Wooing. There are many productions of the Scots ballad poets upon the lion-like mode of wooing practised by the ancient Highlanders, when they had a fancy for the person or property of a lowland damsel. One example is found in Mr. Robert Jameson's popular Scottish songs. Bonny Baby Livingstone gaed out to see the Kay, and she was met with Glenlyon, who has stolen her away. He took free her satin coat, put on her silken gown, sin round in his tartan plaid, and happed her round and round. In another ballad we are told how 24 Hieland men came down by Fiddick Bead, and they have sworn a deadly aith, Jean Maya should be a breed. And they have sworn a deadly aith, ilk man upon his dirk, that she should wed with Duncan Gera, they'd make bloody works. This last we have from tradition, but there are many others in the collections of Scottish ballads to the same purpose. The achievement of Robert Oig, or young Rob Roy, as the Lowlands called him, was celebrated in a ballad of which there are 20 different and various editions. The tune is lively and wild, and we select the following words from memory. Rob Roy is frae the Highlands come, down to the Lowland border, and he has stolen that lady away to haud his house in order. He set her on a milk-white steed, of none he stood in awe, until they reached the Highland hills, aboon the Balmaha. That's a pass on the eastern margin of Loch Lomond, and an entrance to the Highlands. Saying, be content with me, lady. Where will ye find in Lennox land sae braw a man as me, lady? Rob Roy he was my father called, MacGregor was his name, lady. A' the country far and near have heard MacGregor's fame, lady. He was a hedge about his friends, a heckle to his foes, lady. If any man did him gainsay, he felt his deadly blows, lady. I am as bold, I am as bold, I am as bold and more, lady. Any man that doubts my word may try my good claymore, lady. Then be content with me, lady, for now you are my wedded wife, until the day you die, lady. Number 6. Gwyllndŵ. The following notices concerning this chief fell under the author's eye while the sheets were in the act of going through the press. They occur in manuscript memoirs written by a person intimately acquainted with the incidents of 1745. This chief had the important task entrusted to him of defending the castle of Doune, in which the Chevalier placed a garrison to protect his communication with the Highlands, and to repel any sallies which might be made from Stirling Castle. Gwyllndŵ distinguished himself by his good conduct in this charge. Gwyllndŵ is thus described: Glengyle is, in person, a tall, handsome man, and has more of the mien of the ancient heroes than our modern fine gentlemen are possessed of. He is honest and disinterested to a proverb, extremely modest, brave and intrepid, and born one of the best partisans in Europe. In short, the whole people of that country declared that never did men live under so mild a government as Glengyle's, not a man having so much as lost a chicken while he continued there. It would appear from this curious passage that Glengyle, not Stewart of Balloch, as averred in a note on Waverley, commanded the garrison of Doune. Balloch might no doubt succeed MacGregor in the situation. Editor's Introduction to Rob Roy. In the magnum opus, the author's final edition of the Waverley novels, Rob Roy appears out of its chronological order, and comes next after the Antiquary. In this, as in other matters, the present edition follows that of 1829. The Antiquary, as we said, contained in its preface the author's farewell to his art. This valediction was meant as prelude to a fresh appearance in a new disguise. Constable, who had brought out the earlier works, did not publish the Tales of My Landlord, The Black Dwarf, and Old Mortality, which Scott had nearly finished by November 12, 1816. The 4 volumes appeared from the houses of Mr. Murray and Mr. Blackwood on December 1, 1816. Within less than a month came out Harold the Dauntless, by the author of The Bridal of Triermain. Scott's work on the historical part of the Annual Register had also been unusually arduous. At Abbotsford or at Ashdale his mode of life was particularly healthy. In Edinburgh, between the claims of the courts, of literature, and of society, he was scarcely ever in the open air. Thus hard sedentary work caused, between the publication of Old Mortality and that of Rob Roy, the first of those alarming illnesses which overshadowed the last 15 years of his life. The earliest attack of cramp in the stomach occurred on March 5th, 1817, when he retired from the room with a scream of agony which electrified his guests. Living on "parritch," as he tells Miss Bailey, for his national spirit rejected arrowroot, Scott had yet energy enough to plan a dramatic piece for Terry, The Doom of Devergoyle, but in April he announced to John Ballantyne a good subject for a novel, and on May 6th John, after a visit to Abbotsford with Constable, proclaimed to James Ballantyne the advent of Rob Roy. The anecdote about the title is well known. Constable suggested it, and Scott was at first wisely reluctant to write up to a title. Names like Rob Roy, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, Cleopatra, and so forth, tell the reader too much, and, Scott imagined, often excite hopes which cannot be fulfilled. However, in the geniality of an after-dinner hour in the gardens of Abbotsford, Scott allowed Constable to be sponsor. Many things had lately brought Rob into his mind. In 1812 Scott had acquired Rob Roy's gun, a long Spanish-barrelled piece with his initials R.M.C., C standing for Campbell, a name assumed in compliment to the Argyle family. Rob's Spluken had also been presented by Mr. Train to Sir Walter in 1816, and may have directed his thoughts to this popular freebooter. Though Rob flourished in the 15, he was really a character very near Scott, whose friend Invernahyle had fought Rob with broadsword and target, a courteous combat like that between Ajax and Hector. At Tullibody, Scott had met in 1793 a gentleman who once visited Rob, and arranged to pay him blackmail. Mr. William Adam had mentioned to Scott in 1816 the use of the word curly-whirlies for highly decorated architecture, and recognized the phrase next year in the mouth of Andrew Fairservice. In the meeting at Abbotsford, May 2nd, 1817, Scott was very communicative, sketched Bailie Nicol Jarvie, and improvised a dialogue between Rob and the magistrate. A week later he quoted to Southey Swift's lines, "Too bad for a blessing, too good for a curse," which probably suggested Andrew Fairservice's final estimate of Scott's hero. "Over bad for blessing, and o'er good for banning." These are the trifles which show the bent of Scott's mind at this period. The summer of 1817 he spent in working at the Annual Register and at the Border Antiquities. When the courts rose, he visited Rob's cave at the head of Loch Lomond, and this visit seems to have been gossiped about, as literary people, hearing of the new novel, expected the cave to be a very prominent feature. He also went to Glasgow and refreshed his memory of the cathedral, nor did he neglect old books, such as A Tour Through Great Britain by a Gentleman, 4th edition, 1748. This yielded him the Bailie's account of Glasgow commerce in Musselburgh stuffs and Edinburgh shallons, and the phrase sortable cargoes. Hence, too, Scott took the description of the rise of Glasgow. Thus Scott was taking pains with his preparations. The book was not written in post haste. Announced to Constable early in May, the last sheet was not corrected till about December 21st, when Scott wrote to Ballantyne, "Dear James, with great joy I send you Roy. 'Twas a tough job, but we're done with Rob." Rob Roy was published on the last day of 1817. The toughness of the job was caused by constant pain, and by struggles with the lassitude of opium. So seldom sentimental, so rarely given to expressing his melancholy moods in verse, Scott, while composing Rob Roy, wrote the beautiful poem The Sun upon the Weirdlaw Hill, in which, for this once, pity of self through all makes broken moan. Some stress may be laid on the state of Sir Walter's health at this moment, because a living critic has tried to show that, in his case, every pang of the stomach paralyzes the brain, that he never had a fit of the cramp without spoiling a chapter. Mr. Ruskin's Fiction Fair and Foul, 19th Century, 1880, page 955. Rob Roy is a sufficient answer to these theories. The mind of Scott was no slave to his body. The success of the story is pleasantly proved by a sentence in a review of the day. "It's an event unprecedented in the annals either of literature or of the custom house, that the entire cargo of a packet or smack, bound from Leith to London, should be the impression of a novel, for which the public curiosity was so much upon the alert as to require this immense importation to satisfy. 10,000 copies of a 3-volume novel are certainly ponderous cargo, and Constable printed no fewer in his first edition. Scott was assured of his own triumph in February 1819, when a dramatized version of his novel was acted in Edinburgh by the company of Mr. William Murray, a descendant of the traitor Murray of Broughton. Mr. Charles Mackay made a capital Bailey, and the piece remains a favourite with Scotch audiences. It's plain, from the reviews, that in one respect Rob Roy rather disappointed the world. They had expected Rob to be a much more imposing and majestic cateran, and complained that his foot was set too late on his native heather. They found too much of the drover and intriguer, too little of the traditional driver of the spoil. This was what Scott foresaw when he objected to writing up to a title. In fact, he did not write up to it, and, as the Scots Magazine said, shaped his story in such a manner as to throw busybodies out in their chase, with a slight degree of malicious finesse. All the expeditions to the wonderful cave have been thrown away, for the said cave is not once, we think, mentioned from beginning to end. Rob Roy equals Waverley in its pictures of Highland and Lowland society and character. Scott had clearly set himself to state his opinions about the Highlands as they were under the patriarchal system of government. The Highlanders were then a people, not lawless indeed, but all their law was the will of their chief. Bailie Nicol Jarvie makes a statement of their economic and military condition as accurate as it is humorous. The modern Highland question may be studied as well in the Bailie's words as in volumes of history and wildernesses of blue books. A people patriarchal and military as the Arabs of the desert were suddenly dragged into modern commercial and industrial society. All old bonds were snapped in a moment. Emigration, at first opposed by some of the chiefs, and the French wars depleted the country of its long-legged callants, gone wanting the breeks. Cattle took the place of men, sheep of cattle, deer of sheep, and in the long peace a population grew up again, a population destitute of employment even more than of old, because war and robbery had ceased to be outlets for its energy. Some chiefs, as Dr. Johnson said, treated their lands as an attorney treats his row of cheap houses in a town. Hence the Highland question, a question in which Scott's sympathies were with the Highlanders. Rob Roy, naturally, is no mere novel with a purpose, no economic tract in disguise. Among Scott's novels it stands alone as regards its pictures of passionate love. The love of Diana Vernon is no less passionate for its admirable restraint. Here Scott displays, without affectation, a true Greek reserve in his art. The deep and strong affection of Diana Vernon would not have been otherwise handled by him who drew the not more immortal picture of Antigone. Unlike modern novelists, Sir Walter deals neither in analysis nor in rapturous effusions. We can, unfortunately, imagine but too easily how some writers would peep and pry into the concealed emotions of that maiden heart, how others would revel in tears, kisses, and caresses. In place of all these, Scott writes, "She extended her hand, but I clasped her to my bosom. She sighed as she extricated herself from the embrace which she permitted, escaped to the door which led to her own apartment, and I saw her no more." Months pass in a mist of danger and intrigue before the lovers meet again in the dusk and the solitude. "Mr. Francis Osbaldiston," cries the girl's voice through the moonlight, "should not whistle his favourite airs when he wishes to remain undiscovered." And Diana Vernon, for she, wrapped in a horseman's cloak, was the last speaker, whistled in playful mimicry the second part of the tune which was on my lips when they came up. Surely there was never, in story or in song, a lady so loving and so light of heart, save Rosalind alone. Her face touches Frank's as she says good-bye for ever, It was a moment never to be forgotten, inexpressibly bitter, yet mixed with a sensation of pleasure so deeply soothing and affecting as at once to unlock all the floodgates of the heart. She rides into the night. Her lover knows the hysterica passio of poor Lear, but I had scarce given vent to my feelings in this paroxysm ere I was ashamed of my feelings. These were men and women who knew how to love and how to live. All men who read Rob Roy are innocent rivals of Frank Osbaldistone. Di Vernon holds her place in our hearts with Rosalind, and these airy affections, like the actual emotions which they mimic, are not matters for words. This lady, so gay, so brave, so witty and fearless, so tender and true, who endured trials which might have dignified the history of a martyr, who spent the day in darkness and the night in vigil, and never breathed a murmur of weakness or complaint, is as immortal in men's memories as the actual heroine of the White Rose, Flora MacDonald. Her place is with Helen and Antigone, with Rosalind and Imogen, the deathless daughters of dreams. She brightens the world as she passes, and our own hearts tell us all the story when Osbaldistone says, "You know how I lamented her." In the central interest, which for once is the interest of love, Rob Roy attains the nobility, the reserve, the grave dignity of the highest art. It is not easy to believe that Frank Osbaldistone is worthy of his lady, but here no man is a fair judge. In the four novels, Waverley, Guy Mannering, The Antiquary, and Rob Roy, which we have studied, the hero has always been a young poet. Waverley versified, so did Mannering. Lovel had edited a few lyrical pieces, and in Osbaldistone's rhymes, Scott parodied his own "Blast of that dread horn, on Fontarabian echoes borne." All the heroes then have been poets, and Osbaldistone's youth may have been suggested by Scott's memories of his own, and of the father who feared that he would never be better than a gangrel scapegoat. Like Henry Morton in Old Mortality, Frank Osbaldistone is on the political side taken by Scott's judgment, not by his emotions. To make Di Vernon convert him to Jacobitism would have been to repeat the story of Waverley. Still, he would have been more sympathetic if he had been converted. He certainly does not lack spirit as a sportsman, or, on an occasion, as Sir William Hope says in The Scots Fencing Master, when he encounters Rashleigh in the college gardens. Frank, in short, is all that a hero should be, and is glorified by his affection. Of the other characters, perhaps Rob Roy is too sympathetically drawn. The materials for a judgment are afforded by Scott's own admirable historical introduction. The Rob Roy who so calmly "played booty," and kept a foot in either camp, certainly falls below the heroic. His language has been criticised in late years, and it has been insisted that the Highlanders never talked Lowland Scotch. But Scott has anticipated these cavils in the 18th chapter of the second volume. Certainly no Lowlander knew the Highlanders better than he did, and his ear for dialect was as keen as his musical ear was confessedly obtuse. Scott had the best means of knowing whether Helen MacGregor would be likely to soar into heroics, as she is apt to do. In fact, here we may trust the artist. The novel is as rich as any in subordinate characters, full of life and humour. Morris is one of the few utter cowards in Scott. He has none of the passionate impulses toward courage of the hapless hero in the Fair Maid of Perth. The various Osbaldistones are nicely discriminated by Diana Vernon, in one of those Beatrix moods which Scott did not always admire, when they were displayed by Lady Anne and other girls of flesh and blood. Rashleigh is of a nature unusual in Scott. He is perhaps Sir Walter's nearest approach for malignant egotism to an Iago. Of Bailie Nicol Jarvie, commendation were impertinent. All Scotland arose, called him hers, laughed at and applauded her civic child. Concerning Andrew Fairservice, the first edition tells us what the final edition leaves us to guess, that Tresham may recollect him as gardener at Osbaldistone Hall. Andrew was not a friend who could be shaken off. Diana may have ruled the hall, but Andrew must have remained absolute in the gardens, with something to maw that he would like to see mawn, or something to saw that he would like to see sawn, or something to ripe that he would like to see ripen. and sae he ane dacred, and with a family frae year's end to end, and life's end. His master needed some careful body to look after him. Only Shakespeare and Scott could have given us medicines to make us like this cowardly, conceited, jimp-honest fellow, Andrew Fairservice, who just escapes being a hypocrite by dint of some sincere old covenanting leaven in his veins. We make bold to say that the creator of Parolles and Lucy, and many another lax and lovable knave, would, had he been a Scot, have drawn Andrew Fairservice thus, and not otherwise. The critics of the hour censured, as they were certain to censure, the construction, and especially the conclusion, of Rob Roy. No doubt the critics were right. In both Scott and Shakespeare there is often seen a perfect disregard of the denouement. Any moderately intelligent person can remark on the huddled-up ends and hasty marriages in many of Shakespeare's comedies. Molière has been charged with the same offence, and, if blame there be, Scott is almost always to blame. Thackeray is little better. There must be some reason that explains why men of genius go wrong where every newspaper critic, every milliner's girl acquainted with circulating libraries, can detect the offence. In the closing remarks of Old Mortality, Scott expresses himself humorously on this matter of the denouement. His schoolmaster author takes his proof-sheets to Miss Martha Buskbody, who was the literary set in Gandercleugh, having read through the whole stock of 3 circulating libraries. Miss Buskbody criticizes the Dominic as Lady Louisa Stuart habitually criticized Sir Walter. "Your plan of admitting a formal conclusion will never do," the Dominie replied. "Really, madam, you must be aware that every volume of the narrative turns less and less interesting as the author draws to a conclusion, just like your tea, which, though excellent hyson, is necessarily weaker and more insipid in the last cup." He compares the orthodox happy ending to the luscious lump of half-dissolved sugar, usually found at the bottom of the cup. This topic might be discussed, and indeed has been discussed, endlessly. In our actual lives, it is probable that most of us have found ourselves living for a year, a month, or a week, in a chapter or half a volume of a novel, and these have been our least happy experiences. But we have also found that the romance vanishes away like a ghost, dwindles out, closes with ragged ends, and has no denouement. Then the question presents itself, as art is imitation, should not novels, as a rule, close thus? The experiment has frequently been tried, especially by the modern geniuses who do not conceal their belief that their art is altogether finer than Scott's, or, perhaps, than Shakespeare's. In his practice, and in his Dominie's critical remarks, Sir Walter appears inclined to agree with him. He was just as well aware as his reviewers, or as Lady Louisa Stuart, that the conclusion of Rob Roy is huddled up, that the sudden demise of all the Baldistones is a high-handed measure. He knew that. In real life, Frank and Di Vernon would never have met again after that farewell on the moonlit road, but he yielded to Miss Buskbody's demand for a glimpse of sunshine in the last chapter. He understood the human liking for the final lump of sugar. After all, fiction is not, any more than any other art, a mere imitation of life. It's an arrangement, a selection. Scott was too kind, too humane to disappoint us, the crowd of human beings who find much of our happiness in dreams. He could not keep up his own interest in his characters after he had developed them. He could take pleasure in giving them life. He had little pleasure in ushering them into an earthly paradise. So that part of his business he did carelessly, as his only rivals literature have also done it. The critics censured, not unjustly, the machinery of the story, these mysterious assets of Osbaldistone and Tresham, whose absence was to precipitate the rising of 1715. The Edinburgh Review lost its heart. Geoffrey's heart was always being lost to Di Vernon, but it pronounces that a king with legs of marble, or a youth with an ivory shoulder, heroes of the Arabian Nights and of Pindar, was probable, compared with the wit and accomplishments of Diana. This is hypercriticism. Diana's education under Rashleigh had been elaborate. Her acquaintance with Shakespeare, her main strength, is unusual in women, but not beyond the limits of belief. Here she is within agreeable contrast to Rose Bradwardine, who had never heard of a Romeo and Juliet. In any case, Diana compels belief as well as wins affection, while we are fortunate enough to be in her delightful company. As long as we believe in her, it is not of moment to consider whether her charms are incompatible with probability. Rob Roy was finished, in spite of a very bad touch of the cramp for about 3 weeks in November, which, with its natural attendants of dullness and weakness, made me unable to get our matters forward till last week, says Scott to Constable. But, adds the unconquerable author, I am resting myself here a few days before commencing my new labours, which will be untrodden ground, and, I think, pretty likely to succeed. The new labours were The Heart of Midlothian. This by Andrew Lang. End of Volume 1, Section 6, Letters, recording by Mike Harris.